Hi, I'm Tony,
And I'm Santi.
and welcome to Pentalk.
Welcome to Pentalk. This is episode X.
Episode X. So, we have a really great lineup of pens today for Pentalk. First off, we have the Limey Safari in charcoal gray. Excuse me. Lamey.
Oh, no worries, Tony. And then our second pen of the day is going to be the Pilot V-Ball in 0.5 flavor featuring pure liquid ink. And our final pen of the day with something special to go with it is the Molotov 227HS. That's the acrylic premium paint pen with the 4mm tip.
So, let's dive right in. We've got a great lineup.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, this is the Lammy Safari charcoal gray fountain pen. On the outside, it's a really sleek design. I'm actually a big fan of it. The clip has a very prominent feature on the front. But what I like most about the external design is it has flattened sides along two of the shaft sides, as well as when you take the clip off, it has two flattened sides, sort of forming a conical pyramidal structure down the grip, finally leading to the tip. And now this is where this pen gets really special.
You might be able to see it from there, but it's a fountain pen.
Yeah, and Santi, I think this is the first fountain pen we've reviewed on the show.
Yeah, it's a first time for us here.
So we can talk about this design a little bit more. The clip, or the lid, rather, is actually pretty big. It takes up a lot of profile. A lot of the weight of the pen is part of the clip.
Yeah, it's got a lot of visual presence. You kind of touched on the clip as well, pardon me, very briefly, but it's a large, imposing clip, and that's in keeping with the rest of the cap. It's a very large diameter, substantial amount of girth to it. It's a little, as the head of the pen, it's a little bit of a power top, if you will.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And I mostly prefer and also use clicker pens. I know we've mostly reviewed clicker pens on the show.
But as everybody knows, I'm a real advocate of the snap top pens.
You're a fan of the snap top
Well,
pens?
yeah. I think back to the Pilot Precise rolling ball.
Oh, yeah.
That I was so fond of. 2 years of a snap top pen. I really grew to enjoy the ability to really just pop the cap off and put it to the side. There's a lot more flexibility there. It opens a whole new avenue of fiddling.
Now, something I will definitely have to add here is that, may I see the pen?
Yeah,
Thank you. Now, this pen, the cap is so large that when you put it on the back, it kind of gets in the way a little bit, and it also definitely changes the weight a little bit too much for my liking.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, definitely a overall con of this pen is how much actual weight the clip has. Now, if we have a clicker pen and we click it, there's no weight change there. The pen you're holding in your hand while it's not engaged is the pen you get while you're writing.
Yeah, definitely.
But with a cap, it's totally different, and that's why you need to take the size of the cap into so much thought, and you really need to make sure that it fits with the pen. Now, of course, this cap is rather oversized because the pen is a fountain pen, and you need to keep the tip of the pen very safe. Santi, do you want to describe a little bit about what the fountain pen is?
Yeah, so the fountain pen is kind of the classic design for a pen prior to the advent of the ballpoint, where you've got a rotating ball that distributes the ink on your paper. The fountain pen just uses a flat piece of metal that's split down the middle.
Like a quill.
Like a quill, exactly. It was just a natural evolution of the quill pen. And it has a reservoir of ink behind the tip.
This fountain pen has lost its plumage.
Yeah, you might say that. So the pen then, the way it distributes ink, you might wonder, if it's not, if it doesn't have any moving parts that mechanically roll across the paper, it's more of a splitting action of the nib, it's called, and that allows the ink to flow down the nib and contact the paper where you obviously deposit it and your thoughts.
And what are some of the benefits of a fountain pen, just specifically from a ink to nib dispersal standpoint?
Yeah, a lot of people advocate for fountain pens, on the basis that you get a little more artistic line work from them. There's you see different changes in the geometry of how the line is applied on the paper. And I think there's also certainly a nostalgia factor to it. People
absolutely
want to harken back to those original days of ink writing, and to the quill pen even. And it kind of evokes that history of writing and the written word.
I must say, the fountain pen has an incredibly stately feel to it. It's simply majestic in how it stands against other pens. In a day and age where pens have become monotonous, we see them everywhere. We go through 10s, 20s pens in probably a few months, in a year maybe, especially if you're writing with small Bics or simple ballpoints or the throwaway Papermates.
Right.
Of course, that number is going to go very far down if you're writing with a Pilot G2.
Yeah, we know. We've talked
incredibly
endlessly
long
about the mileage of a Pilot G2. Talked endlessly, much like the longevity of a Pilot G2 itself.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Now I'm disassembling the pen, and it looks like it has an ink reservoir inside. So I'm a little apprehensive to try to take the reservoir out. I'd hate to spill ink all over the table and spoil the shoot. But it looks like the majority of this pen can be kept, through multiple cartridges. So this provides a little more, again, longevity to the pen. And maybe it's a little more sustainable. You're using less plastic. You're not throwing away the entire body of the pen every time you run out of ink.
But could it be a little gaudy of the pen to propose that you would be the one using this pen for multiple cartridges? Is this pen so egotistical that it should decide whether you get to discard it and simply buy another if you like it a lot, or if you really want to keep the same specific parts of plastic? Are they built to last? And what's going to be the benefit of keeping this pen over simply buying a new one?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I want to believe that they thought about that. And in a way, they've presented a package that would allow you to keep the pen for a long time. The clip, again, is extremely robust. It's a very thick metal wire.
Very powerful.
So clip. I couldn't even tell you how many sheets of paper you could clip with that. It's really more than you probably would ever need to.
You could even clip this onto...
This could function as a bona fide paper clip.
Yeah.
If you really wanted it to.
Yeah.
And so, in that sense, they gave you a package that you might want to maintain for years. It's a little presumptuous of me, maybe. But they've given you the option, which I think is nice. But you speak on maybe it is kind of egotistical of a pen to assume that you're going to keep it around for so long. And I think in that same vein, that's one of the problems of fountain pens, is if you're writing with a fountain pen, people around you might make assumptions. It seems maybe like
it's a showy pen.
It's a showy thing to do. You seem to be a little bit of a contrarian. You maybe think you're above other people because you're writing with a different pen, or a pen that's got
older
more heritage.
Roots. Yeah,
roots.
Deeper
certainly.
ties in the writing history.
Yeah, but if you are a real pen enthusiast and you believe in what you're putting down on the paper and you're simply enjoying the experience of the pen, I can't see anything wrong with that.
Oh, of course not. Pens are all about enjoyment and usability. So let's get to the usability.
Yeah, without further ado.
Gonna use this pad. We have some really nice paper here. I believe this is actually art paper, because we're featuring an art pen. It's a thick pad. This is probably around 50 or 60 sheets of paper.
Yeah, sounds.
And it's, high quality paper. High quality paper for a high quality podcast.
Yeah.
So I'm giving it the old signature test. And I have to say, the sound, the auditory feedback of this pen is really good. Some pens can err on the scritchy side, and some you can barely hear at all. But I think this one strikes a nice balance.
Yeah. And for me, auditory feedback's also such a great thing to have in a pen. It just provides more to the sensory experience of writing. You've got, obviously, the feel of the pen through your fingertips, and you see the words going down on the paper, but just that extra sensory kind of experience, it really gives you more from the writing in its entirety.
Yeah. And one thing that I know I really value in a pen is the smoothness of the ink and how it disperses on the paper. And I'm very impressed with the Lamy Safari.
Yeah?
It's actually quite nice the way it smears on the paper, and it doesn't bleed too much, but it bleeds a good amount. You know that you're laying down a nice trail of ink.
Mm-hmm. I gave it a little test run earlier. You might have caught that on camera, but we all know that I'm a hard writer, and with this pen, I tend to lay down a very thick trail.
Really?
But then I'll go ahead and give it the signature test myself. And again, a thick trail. But I'm very impressed by how smooth it is. A lot of fountain pens you might work with might have a tendency to grab the paper or stick when you try to push them. Fountain pens very much struggle with writing on the push stroke, but this, in almost a shocking fashion, has no trouble whatsoever. You can push, you can go to the side, you can...
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, I just went to pull it straight down, and it had a little hiccup, but let's not...
Interesting.
Oh, yeah. Again.
These are some problems. So this pen actually works better while pushing than pulling. Really strange for a fountain pen.
Yeah, a real departure. Maybe we're just pulling too fast and the ink doesn't have time to flow out, but that's not what I expected to see.
That is one thing certainly to not be understated. The fact that when writing with a fountain pen, you really need to find your own rhythm, one that isn't too fast or too slow, and one that's really in tandem with the pen. I would argue that fountain pens have the most personality of all the pens, interpersonal between you and the writing experience.
Yeah, it's a very primal experience, and we talk about the history of it, but it's you and this very simple object.
Basic.
Trying to negotiate a piece of paper. So something I noticed, and I just gave the pen a little wipe on the back of the nib. If you are writing for a long time with this pen, it might have a tendency to pool up ink around.
Yeah.
And we talk about, a lot of pens have a little bleeding or ink buildup when you write with them for a long time, but this pen in particular, and fountain pens in general, might have the propensity to be a little messier than a ballpoint because the ink's not so carefully contained.
Of course. Yes.
Yeah.
In fact, it's not contained at all as it flows down the back of the nib. It actually is totally exposed to the air and whatever grit or grime may have attached itself to the nib.
Yeah. Not to be understated, we haven't given this pen a full run-through of its durability. Our experience with it is slightly limited. So it remains to be seen whether the pen's own presumptions of longevity hold up in the real world.
Yeah. I'm really interested to see how it holds up.
Yeah.
Now, what did you think about the grip here? So I mentioned that it's flattened a little bit. There is no rubber or silicone grip of any sort in the pen. It's just the same sort of material that follows the entire length of the body of the pen, as well as the cap. It's a high-quality material. It feels good on the fingertips.
Yeah, it's kind of a softer, not softer in that sense, but it's like it's not a smooth, glossy plastic. It's like a matte plastic.
Matte is a very good word to
Which
describe
does
it.
gives your fingers more purchase on it, and it makes me a little more confident that it won't slip during those long writing sessions.
But it does get pretty skinny. At the very tip where you'd be holding it to write,
Yeah.
I would almost reckon that it gets as skinny as the tip of your old-fashioned Bic, the
Yeah.
kind that comes in a 30 or 20 pack. It gets really skinny, and for me, I like a little bit more heft to my grip,
Right.
so that I
Just
don't
a little
need to,
more to grab onto.
yeah, that I don't need to pinch so tight.
Mm-hmm.
So that's if I were in a long writing sesh with this pen, that would become perhaps an issue.
Yeah, certainly something to think about if the diameter is something that is very important to you. Now, the angles that you had mentioned prior, they give me a lot of confidence. Even if it does approach a very thin tip, like you said, having some of those flat faces and angles give your fingers a little bit more grabbing power. And there's a very natural position that you can sit your fingers in.
Yes.
There's no ambiguity about where your digits belong.
Yeah. And one thing that is also important with a fountain pen is that there's a little bit of a learning curve in knowing how to write with a fountain pen. As I mentioned before, you need to find the rhythm of which the ink disperses.
Yeah.
But you also you need to know where to put your fingers and how to hold it in your hand. One thing is that this is a asymmetrical pen.
Oh, true. That's
Along the z-axis.
Mhm.
In that you need to be holding the fountain pen with the the glossy side of the tip upwards.
Yeah. The nib will be concave down onto your paper.
And that provides the surface for which the liquid ink slides onto the nib of the pen. One mistake I see a lot of first-time users of fountain pens do is they'll actually hold it upside down and they'll write a little bit and they'll say, "Why is this so scratchy? What's going on? I paid $8 for this pen. I paid for a smooth experience," and it's simply because they're holding it wrong and they don't know because there's no instruction guide that goes with it. Any fountain pen that you buy is just going to assume that you've bought tons of fountain pens before, and for a pen enthusiast, maybe, but for the average pen goer, maybe not.
Maybe not. Perhaps, though, it's all part of the learning experience and part of one's own pen journey to make mistakes like that.
As we know, pen enthusiasm comes with some mistakes.
It can be fraught, yes.
So that has been the Lamy, Safari, and Charcoal Gray.
Yeah,
A solid pen.
definitely.
So what pen do we have up next, Santi?
So the next pen of the evening is another blue ink pen, my favorite, as we've covered before. But this is the Pilot V-Ball, another in the series of Pilot's excellent rollerball pens. They are, I would tend to say, the champion, really, when it comes to
course.
mass market rollerballs. Everybody's pocket, everybody's office, everybody's desk has some kind of Pilot rollerball on it. So the V-Ball, let's not uncap it quite yet. First, the physical impressions. It's a very cylindrical pen. There's no curving to it. The cap is perfectly cylindrical. Again, a capped pen, metal clip, with like a nice flat metal, much like the V series.
In fact, it is part of the V series.
It is.
It just doesn't have a number associated with it,
the
which is
V-Ball.
sort of how it carves its own niche in the V community.
Right. It's thinner than the V series. Like say V5, V7s.
Now, Santi, you're sort of the expert in the podcast about the V series of pens because you have so much experience with obviously the V,
The rolling ball. The precise rolling ball.
Precise rolling ball, of course.
Yeah. The V-Ball kind of carries on the tradition of the precise rolling ball, I think. It's a very minimal design. It's perfectly cylindrical. However, instead of being flat at the ends, like the precise V5, V7, the V-Ball has these hemispheres at the end, contributing to the ball aesthetic that Pilot seems to be going for.
Of course.
Upon uncapping the pen, you see that the straight cylinder aesthetic continues up until the tip, where you see it's tough to describe the look of the tip. It narrows in a pyramidal fashion, but the plastic part, prior to reaching the actual metal tip itself, kind of has these triangular cuts into it that run longitudinally along the tip. Again, this lends an interesting utilitarian kind of maybe post-industrial sort of Art Deco feel to it. There's a lot of geometry to the tip. And the grip has in a clear window almost. It's transparent all the way around, and there's these fins that run through it. So if you can imagine like a small cylinder where I imagine the ink runs through to the tip.
Of course.
A small opaque cylinder through this transparent cylinder, and then an array of tightly packed fins, all lending to that kind of interesting aesthetic that I'm personally a really huge fan of.
Yeah. So this is also a liquid ink pen. So that means that inside the cartridge, there's no gel, there's no filler. The ink is simply let loose. And it almost has a sort of leveler aspect to it in that you can see through. There's a small little window right here where you can see straight into the cartridge.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you can't separate this cartridge at all.
Yeah, it
This
is
is
a single piece pen.
what we like to call a fused pen.
Fused pen.
The only moving part is the cap and, of course, the ink.
Certainly.
And this leads to a lot of ink getting onto the paper. Of course, it can also lead to a little bit of troubles down the road. Once it gets low on ink, because it lacks gel, it lacks that heft behind it, the ink dispersal can sort of start to hiccup.
Yeah.
Or gush. It can get too thick or too thin at a moment's notice, and there's no way to predict it. So it really hampers the writing experience at the end of life, but certainly at the beginning, it's truly incredible the way liquid ink pens are so fluid and so smooth when you write with them.
Very swift. That liquid ink, it never has any trouble keeping up, no matter how fast you write.
Yeah, and
something to be said about this pen is it's a very affordable pen, more so than the Precise V5, Precise Rolling Ball series of pens. So for anybody looking for a liquid ink pen on a budget and you don't mind the small diameter, which for a pen in this kind of category, I feel like you can't really fault it for. This is a great choice. I certainly recommend that anybody go out and try this out. It's a low investment to see, and you might really like it.
Yeah. We always advocate here on Pentalk, really just trying new pens, trying out stuff. You find a pen on the ground, you find it in the hallway at school. Pick that pen up, give it a shot. It may just change your day. Yeah. So I guess it's time to write with this.
Yeah.
Let's give it a test. So we have our pad here again. This is probably the same amount of sheets. We've only, so we can just tear this away.
Yeah.
Oh, that over here. Perfect. So I'll give it the old signature test, of course. Well, my first thoughts are a little bit scratchy, especially for a liquid ink pen. I think that's where liquid ink pens can really exceed and overtake ballpoint, certainly gel, is that they're so smooth. You can barely feel it touch the paper, but you still get that tactile feedback.
Yeah.
And I have to say there was a little bit too much tactile feedback. There was a little bit too much connection with the paper for my liking. Especially when you can see that this pen has a lot of ink left in it. So it should really be in the heyday of its life.
Yeah. This might be the peak of it. Something to be said for this pen is it is a 0.5 millimeter ball.
Yeah.
So it is on the thinner side, and the pad we're writing on, as kind of an art pad, it has a little more texture to it.
Definitely.
But that's before I give it a whirl.
Now I did notice that this pen's ink dispersal is really quite optimal. I could write in any direction with it.
Yeah.
And it always leaves the same amount of ink, just like
really
a good pen
is.
should.
That's the notable part. There's
Yeah.
no variation in the thickness of the line it leaves, no matter how fast or slow. Well, if you write slow enough, it'll get thicker. But
Of course,
you know,
all pens do.
just moving your, in the course of writing any letter, there's not a huge difference. It's supremely. Sorry, the word escapes me now.
Elegant.
Elegant. Yeah, it is. It is elegant. You get a very. It's almost like a typeface type effect.
Yeah.
Now,
what you
mentioned-
want to put on the page
Yeah.
is what you get put on the page.
That's true. There's no embellishment from the pen.
Yes.
It's direct. You mentioned the scratchiness, and I, as one that's a huge fan of, a little bit of scratch,
Mm-hmm.
I understand what you're saying. This pen and this pad, there's a little bit more scratch, and it even feels like the point is digging into it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Which, at least for me, it kind of felt like it hampered my writing. I think if I had no choice but to use this pad, this wouldn't be the pen I picked up.
Really, certainly not for a marathon note-taking or journaling session.
Yeah, with how it digs in, it might just be too fatiguing to write with it for so long.
Now, one thing that is actually very interesting to me, because we both felt that this was a little bit too scratchy for our liking, is that it has a conical tip, as opposed to the other pens in the V series, such
tend
as
to
the V8,
see
V7.
The needle style tip.
Which would be the tip goes up, and then there's sort of a flat part where the needle protrudes from. This one looks more ballpoint-esque in that regard. It's not trying to showboat as a liquid ink pen.
Yeah.
Which I think in this case, it could do with a little showboating. This is a very subdued pen. It is not gaudy in the least.
No, it's quite the sleeper as rollerballs go.
Yeah.
But for the price point, that might be the appropriate thing to do.
Yeah.
Something to be said, though, at this price point, very few pens have a metal clip,
Yeah.
especially one such as this. It's a very robust metal clip.
It appears to be the same as you would find in the other pens in the Pilot V series, the V franchise. But this one, instead of being ended with a metal hook, simply a longer extension of the clip itself that's bent over, like the other V series.
Yeah.
This one has a really impressive sort of plastic ball. On the end of the tip, where it protrudes mostly beneath it, but there's still about maybe 25% of the ball protruding from the upper side of the clip, which I think is very aesthetically pleasing. Probably the most subtle and best choice in terms of design on this pen, I'd have to say.
Yeah, that's a very excellent choice I think they made with that. I agree.
Sticking with the ball aesthetic.
Yeah, they really committed to that, and it pays off. It's a very consistent pen visually, and though we had a little trouble writing with it under our particular circumstances, my previous experience with the pen lends me to believe that if we were on a different piece of paper, maybe
Yeah.
a little different writing surface, something harder perhaps, we might see this pen shine a little bit more than it has today.
Certainly, it's an art pad with plenty of grip, and it's a pad. There's lots of give to the paper beneath it.
Yeah.
In fact, let's go ahead and try it on a solo sheet. This is
sure,
one
yeah.
solo sheet on some hard muslin type material at the table. Wow, that is much smoother.
Is it?
Yeah, certainly try this out.
Oh, thank you. Ooh, I'm getting a little grab here, but
Doing a little grab.
as we know, I'm again a hard writer, so it might just not be this pen's day for me, which is too bad to say because visually I'm a huge fan.
Really, of the understated subtle V series.
Yeah. I think for my uses, it would have to be maybe printer paper on a hard table, which is too bad. So for the hard writers out there, might be a hard knock decision for this one. But
Yeah.
if you're a little lighter writer, just like Tony found out, maybe a single sheet is the right place for this pen.
Yeah, definitely single sheet, great note pen, but watch out for when it runs out of ink.
Yeah. So Tony, I noticed you were sipping on your cup a little bit. Maybe it's
Yeah.
time to talk a little tea.
I think it is Santi. I think we should talk a little tea.
All right. So today we've got the Trader Joe's Organic Moroccan Mint Green Tea. Now, they provide a little story on the side of the tea box, and they talk about tea symbolizing hospitality and care, especially in North Africa, in Morocco, where this tea hails from. They say you can enjoy it hot or cold. Something to note that we might touch base on later.
Yeah. Now, we're not really much iced tea drinkers on the show.
Yeah.
Part of the tradition is, the wonderful mugs that we have every time.
Certainly.
Now, I have to say that this tea, while it was hot, it had a really, really strong aroma of mint.
Yeah, I noticed that too. When you even open up the packet, you really get that big hit of mint. And when you pour the hot water on, there's a real bouquet of mint,
Yeah.
a strong nose.
And it's definitely a green tea. It has not too much bitterness, but it's strong.
It is strong. It's funny. I've left this bag steeping for the entire show so far.
Interesting.
And I'm not getting any notes of bitterness. It's not getting too dry to the mouth. I'm very surprised. Very few teas can kind of withstand that prolonged steeping and not get a little astringent.
Of course. And one thing that I have to say about this tea is that it's got a marvelous color. When you first put the tea bag in and you pour the hot water over it, the color immediately bursts from the package, the tea bag, and fills the whole mug, as well as I said before, the very powerful aroma of mint is quite pleasant.
Yeah.
I'm actually very impressed with this tea.
Me too. The color as it stands now, it's a very medium honey gold.
Yeah.
And it's something nice to have in your cup. I think, especially for an evening tea session, a green, a little bit less potent, maybe less caffeine, although that's debatable. It's very relaxing, especially with all those botanicals like the mint, and I think the package mentions lemongrass as well.
Now, it's called Moroccan mint green tea. What's so notable about the Moroccan tea, Santi?
Now, the package talks about the tea tradition, and I think the Moroccan mint might be a reference to the mint from Morocco.
Of course, yeah.
It's a plant that really thrives in the Moroccan climate, and there's been a lot of talk about this. We heard about this tea from an acquaintance, and it seems to there seems to be some buzz and some traction behind it.
Yeah, and it certainly delivered. Now, one thing I will say is I've been drinking this tea for the whole show. I only steeped mine for 2.5 minutes.
Sort of a typical time.
Yeah, it's retained lots of flavor, but as it cooled down, it lost a lot of the mint taste and was replaced by more of a subdued, average green tea.
Yeah.
Which isn't bad.
No.
But certainly from a kind of tea that, has so much to deliver, especially in the mint department.
Right.
I would have wished that I could taste more mint even as the tea cools down.
Yeah, as a mouth experience, it seems like the tea is very heavily front loaded, and when those mint flavors fade,
it becomes kind of average.
Yeah, it's it's almost hollow compared to its former self when you pour that boiling water in and it hits the bag.
And you see the color, and you immediately smell the mint.
Yeah.
A very powerful sensation.
It is. I'm smiling just thinking about it.
Yeah. It was a great pour.
Yeah.
Now, a few other notes about this tea is that I'm not getting too much grit in the bottom of it. Too much
Mind if I take a
leaf.
look?
Yeah, of course. I still haven't quite finished it.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
But how
Yeah.
about you, Santi?
I've left mine there quite a bit longer. If I just move the bag out of the way to take a look, we do see a little bit of particulate down in there. It seems like if you let it steep for a little longer, maybe some of the dust or finely ground leaves kind of work their way out of the bag, which it makes sense.
Yeah.
So that is something to be noted. This is probably a tea that's worth steeping fast and drinking fast.
Of course. And also, one thing to note is that the tea bags are really quite nice. They seem to be more of a clothy material as opposed to a paper material, which just gives your tea brewing experience what feels like a little bit more clout
Yeah.
than you would otherwise have with a simple paper bag or loose leaves.
Right. I think Trader Joe's ought to be commended for that. And again, they say it's organic, which, might mean something and is a nice touch regardless.
Of course. Well, I think that was the tea.
That was tea.
Certainly a good one.
So now, our next pen is another first for us. It's the Molotov 227HS with the 4mm round tip. Now, what's special about this? It's a paint pen.
Yeah. And as you all know, if you're watching the show, is that Santi and I, although we may be aspiring visual artists, we are certainly no Picassos.
No.
So when we draw, it leaves a little bit something to be desired. We mostly use our pens for utilitarian journaling, note-taking. Lots of signing, that sort of thing.
More words than pictures in my world.
Yeah. Of course. So when it comes to art, we're a little bit underclassed.
We might be lacking in that department.
Yeah.
So
we've actually brought a special guest onto the show.
yeah, enlisted a little help.
Yeah. So we have enlisted the help of an artist who's actually on studio here today, and they're going to help us demo out this pen and really let us know how it delivers in the art department. Yeah. So I'd like to give a real warm welcome to the artist. Hello, here's the pen. Incredible, and yeah, I'll get rid of this. Get rid of this pad.
Give you a little fresh sheet to work with.
Here you go. Wow.
So
The artist is diving right in. Wow.
yeah, and I hope the audience will also extend a warm welcome to our studio artist.
So now, what are they gonna draw? They're letting the pen speak through them as they channel the artistic energy flowing from this pen.
Yeah.
It's a felt tip, and as I noticed when I was holding it, it's got sort of a weight inside of it, probably for jostling up some of the art ink inside of it.
paint
Excuse me,
part,
the paint,
the
yeah,
acrylic paint,
perhaps.
as they said. Now, I noticed right off the bat, as soon as that paint pen hit the paper, it's got a heck of a squeak, pardon my language. So as it moves quickly, you see it really squeaks on the paper. So now for the art, we see a lot of
Really lovely.
strong line work, and with such a bold pen, I think
Yeah.
that's to be expected.
Yeah, and one thing to note certainly is that this is a very thick felt tip, as I mentioned before, and it makes a very strong stroke on the page. And
Yeah.
it doesn't appear to bleed too much to either side. It delivers a really crisp line with plenty of sharp edges, but it does squeak a little bit, and maybe the more you draw with it, the more
Oh.
the ink flows.
I think I just noted there's a little smudging from the pen
onto the artist's hands.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Now, if you're a lefty, that's definitely something to watch out for. Certainly wouldn't try to write a novel with this if you're left-handed.
Wow, and I think the artist has done their work. Very well done. Beautiful. So, artist, how would you rate this pen? What would you say about it?
Wow.
Incredible.
A positive impression, even with the
Thank you very
smudging.
much.
That must speak to
Wow.
the drawing experience.
So this is what the artist has drawn with the felt tip marker. So as you can see, I do notice that the first few strokes that the artist made, there was a little bit of streaking going on with the pen. Santi, what do you think about that?
Yeah. It might be with felt tips, and I've experienced this with Sharpies or Fisher brand lab markers, if you're familiar.
Oh, I'm very familiar with the Fisher brand.
Now, it might take a while for the ink to really get pulled into the tip. You kind of have to warm it up a little bit, and finally, when the pen is ready, then you can really get to work.
So now I noticed that unlike Crayola markers,
Yeah.
also art markers, but of significantly less caliber.
Sure,
Yeah.
there are no Molotovs.
The lid does not actually attach to the end here, which shouldn't be a problem, but certainly if you were maybe drawing outside and you had limited desk space, or maybe you were holding a pad in front of you, it would be kind of cumbersome to hold this, and it can accumulate a lot of ink, so I wouldn't really want to put it in my pocket.
Yeah, and as a cap guy myself, it's a little disappointing to see a cap that doesn't go on the end. That's might not be the case for everybody, but it is a little bit of a knock for me.
Now, the shading quality of this marker is pretty good. When you're trying to color in a large swath of area, you can do so very effortlessly.
Yeah.
And one thing is that it's black, so it really leaves a very bold black mark on the page. And sometimes I know with certain lighter colors, you can see where the strokes were as you were drawing or filling in colors on that.
But with this,
one, you certainly can't.
that's not the case at all. Yeah. That what that lends to the stroke of the pen is there's no texture to it. It's a completely flat line. Now, if you were to do some shading work with this, again, I'm not the resident artist,
Of course.
but this pen might be more of a crosshatcher. You might be more inclined to do some stippling or dot work as
Yeah.
shading.
Pointillism.
So I'll go ahead and give it a run. Ooh. And I can feel straight away that this pen is raring to go.
You need to remember that this pen has been warmed up by a certified, a bona fide artist. So
Yeah. I can feel there's quite...
It looks like there's...
At the risk of overexpressing it, there's almost paint flying out of the tip.
There is
It's
art flowing through this pen right
it's
now.
quite striking. And
It's a
that-
striking stance for a striking pen.
yeah, that characteristic squeak when I really get going, it's funny. It's almost like you could take it two ways, perhaps. Maybe the pen is calling for you to keep writing with such vigor, but maybe it's also a little warning to pump the brakes.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that it only squeaks when you're approaching it with pretty significant speed.
Now, Santi, I have one question for you about this pen. You mentioned in one of our previous episodes when we were asked a very interesting question about the penultimate pen
That's right.
that we would choose. And if I recall correctly, you chose the Sharpie.
I
Because
did.
it has obvious technical value. It's very utilitarian. It can get a lot done. Now, the Sharpie is also a felt tip. It's a bold felt tip. And it carries a lot of heft. How do you believe that this marker, this Molotov, holds up to the Sharpie?
Now this Molotov it's a strong contender in the paper arena, at least. I haven't had enough experience with the Molotov writing on glossy surfaces or cloth to truly be able to assess it in the field.
Yeah.
And that was most of the reason why I chose the Sharpie. I really appreciated how you can write on a number of things and get that same indelible mark. With the acrylic, if that proves to be the case, with the kind of boldness that it puts down on the paper, this might take the cake as my penultimate pen.
Wow. That's high praise.
Yeah.
So that is the review of the Molotov acrylic.
Yeah.
And
So, thank you for watching. This was Pentalk episode 10. I'm Santi.
And I'm Tony. Thanks for watching.
Keep writing.